Hey Simonics, what's up? Welcome to a new Ionic tutorial, and this time we're gonna talk about desktop, because when you're building an Ionic application, it most of the time looks quite nice on a mobile view or inside a native application, but once you start to build your application for a bigger screen like a desktop, some design elements are just not made for desktop, and therefore today we will implement a horizontal tab bar or horizontal navigation bar basically, which is like the standard on any web page. So here we go. I already started a blank, no, not blank, but a tabs application with Ionic. Simply because I think for the tabs, that is the biggest problem, since this UI looks good on a mobile device, but once you start to make this bigger on a web page, this is just not the right interface for a website when you're browsing with a desktop PC. So what we're going to do is we want to hide this navigation and have a nav bar instead at the top once we pass a certain screen width. And to do so, we will use a service that you can generate as well, and then we can get started. One thing up front as well, if you're using a side menu, I think this approach would work as well, but with a side menu you can also use the Ion split pane. And with Ion split pane, you basically already get this bigger screen support, which looks better on iPad, and with some additional styling, you can have the side menu also in place. But again, a lot of pages have the navigation bar at the top, so we're gonna replicate that behavior. So here we go. This is our current application, and here is our service. What we want to do in our service is we want to keep a subject, and especially a behavior subject. We will initialize this with false, and then our other pages, in our case just one page, will be subscribed to this subject, but of course we will return it as an observable, and we will also make one additional change in here. So other pages will call this is desktop view, and this will basically return an observable of the type Boolean. So just to give some more typing information. Now we can return our very own is desktop as observable, and that would actually be enough already. But this would be triggered a lot of times, as you see, once we implement the event handler. So what you can add to make this a bit better is actually to pipe the result and use distinct, no, of course no code completion, until changed. And you're gonna import this one from RxJS as well. So from RxJS operators, I think there we go. And this basically waits until the value has changed. So normally this might emit like 10 times false, 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 and this will only emit false and then wait until the result is true and emit that and then false. So that makes life a bit easier. And also we're gonna have another function in here that we call on Resize, which will be called. All of this happens in the service, but we will actually listen to the events later on in our app component, since this is the topmost element in our application, and we can get the screen width from there in the best possible way. And then we will, from app component, call our service and call this on Resize function. And in here we will for now just have a very simple check if the size is below a certain amount. You can define this, or you could actually define multiple sizes. In our case, we're just using true and false. You could even use a type and then pass like SM, XS, all these bootstrap breakpoints. But we will keep this a bit easier. So what you're gonna do is just call next here with false or true. So if the size is smaller than this value, we're gonna set our is desktop to false, and in the other case to true. And since this will be called multiple times when you resize the view, as I said, the subscriber would get a lot of notifications, and therefore we have the distinct until changed in here. So this is our screen service, and we can now move on to the app component, in which we will do two things. So first of all, right in the beginning, once we're done or once the platform is ready, we will use our private screen size service, and then call it with the current result of this dot platform width. So this is like the initial call to the screen size service, but once we change the size of the browser, we can add the host listener in here and listen for the window resize event, and also catch the arguments which we need, which is the not for event but $event. So this is, as I said, at the topmost place. I had this in the service before, but that wasn't working that well. So I think it's in a good place in here, but still the service makes sense for the subject, as you don't want to have this in the app component. Now in our onResize, once again, we will call the onResize function, and this time simply pass the event target inner width to our function. And I will add a lock in here so we can see how many times this is actually triggered. So basically this is all the time triggered once we change the size of our view. So let's open a little console log here, and then then I might have to relaunch New Year, but still not working. I don't know what's wrong. Maybe it's Mac. I will just think it's the Mac. So we got the service in place and we are reacting to events. That was actually the easy part of this tutorial, I would say, because we're now able to get these events, but you could also do this with media queries and breakpoints, and also know when a certain size is hit. Okay, inner width is, no, not inner width, but the platform width. Sorry for jumping around. Platform width is actually a function or a method that we should call. So now it should hopefully print. So the initial size 299, and then I begin dragging and we get all the sizes in here. We're not yet subscribed to the isDesktop, but we will see in a second how that works. So therefore, let's move on to our tabs page. And in the tabs page, we will of course also inject our private screen service, screen size service, and then screen size service. Yeah, I was just confused for a second, never mind. So now we can finally use the isDesktop view, which returns an observable, which means we can subscribe to the result isDesktop, and then lock this out for now. isDesktop changed isDesktop. So now we're subscribed, and at the certain breakpoint of the size, we should know, first of all, in the beginning, get isDesktop false, and then let's get this a bit bigger. And you see around this number, we get isDesktop change true. And when I go back to a smaller screen, we finally get isDesktop false. Now we just need to use our isDesktop variable in our page, and especially in the HTML. So let's assign this isDesktop, and then we can apply some changes to our tabs page. So the first thing you can easily do is say, please only display this if this is not on a desktop. The change this will make is that once we hit the breakpoint, the complete navigation is gone. And once we get back, it will be back in here again. So that's a good news for now. That means we just have to implement a second view in here. And that is also something I found before in other tutorials about Angular. You could, for example, have a complete different routing for the desktop and the mobile view. Then you would have a function in the app component or the app module which looks for the screen width and only loads the routes for the certain screen size. That works as well. The problem is that you in that case also don't really have just one component. You have the two components and both might contain some logic, so that becomes really, I think, complex. So this approach is a bit easier, although it's not 100% perfect, which we will see in the end. Okay, so we can hide our tabs, but what we really want to do is we want to have a container that is displayed when we are on a desktop view. And in here, you're basically now free to do whatever you want. Well, not 100% free, but you see our test is showing and we can go back. So what we can do now, first of all, is to implement a little Ion header in here. And the goal of this tutorial was, of course, to have a horizontal navigation bar. So I will just add an Ion toolbar, and within that toolbar, I will add a row to make our elements as flexible or responsive as possible. So Ion align items center to center them vertically. And then perhaps in the beginning, most of the pages have like a logo. I might have to grab my logo from somewhere. Let's see, assets. Can I just bring this in here? Please go there. Yes, there we go. So I added just a logo to the assets folder, and then I can use this file in here, logo.png, and I will also have to give it an additional class, which we will define in the end. But for now, let's just make the text to the left. So then we should have a toolbar with a logo and then another column with a size of 10. So you always get to 12 with your columns. And in here, more elements. So we already see we got the toolbar, and then we don't have the toolbar, and then we have the toolbar again. So that's very good for now. But in here, we can now basically build the menu. I just used a simple menu for this case. I will surround this also with the navbar. I'm actually not sure if I just used this in the beginning to test things out or if I still use this really. We will see. We will see. You can't have enough divs. No, that's really a bad advice. But what we do in here is now just filling in. Oops, there was the break. So I brought in 3 buttons, and these buttons are using the router link, and the router link is exactly the same as the routes that are already specified in the general template. So tabs, tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. And we're just using the absolute path in here and setting the router direction to root, which will actually cause a little problem in the end that we will see. And we also use the router link active to see which of our elements is active. So we're gonna have to implement the active link and link class in a second as well. But for now, let's look how our tab bar looks right now. So there we go. Of course, it's not a real tab bar now anymore. It's more like a horizontal bar. But there are still a few things that are not right. So the height of the bar changes because of the image. The tabs are not really displaying anything, and the colors are also pretty awful. Also, what we see here is a problem that once we go back from the routing over there to the tabs, that the router is kind of out of place. And I didn't really find a good solution to this. My actually very hackish, dirty, and not really good solution is in our tabs page to make a little check if the current view is desktop and if the new value is not desktop. So basically this means we're currently changing from desktop to mobile. And in that case, call window location reload. I know this is really an ugly hack, but I couldn't find a solution. I tried different ways. The problem is I think that we have the ngIf in here in our tabs page, which basically hides the router of the tabs navigation, and then we have something else in here, and then once we go back, it is actually lost, the state is lost. So this approach is not 100% responsive, but I think most users are actually either using desktop or a phone, so it wouldn't really hurt them, and you still got the benefit of having the views in one file and the logic in one file. So you really have to weigh this off. If it's important to you that this works completely seamless, if this is really important, or if you're just as a developer dragging the width of the screen around. So with that in place, let's get back to our implementation, which is actually mostly finished, besides that we don't see the content, but that is an easy fix. So let's see, we have the header, which should be closed, and then we just manually implement an Ion router outlet in here. We will give it a little class so we can apply some desktop classes to our content easily. And now all of the things that the Angular router loads are going into this Ion router outlet. Also, perhaps we want to have a little class footer, and in here, whatever, span Ionic Academy 2020. So all of the content will be rendered in here. Everything here was just the header area for the tabs bar. And now we see we can actually use the same routing. We didn't change anything in there, and see the content in here. And once we go back to the small screen, which of course right now triggers a little reload, and you shouldn't click on external links if you're testing out things. But you see everything works fine in here, and we can go to the bigger screen and everything works fine as well, although the tab 2 doesn't really have any content. But this is already a lot closer to a desktop navigation than what we had before with the tabs at the bottom. So now we just need a bit of styling, and I will just bring in a few CSS snippets and rules. So what we need is giving our router outlet a bit of margin and padding, because right now, as you can see, there's actually an area of the Ion content hidden behind the header. So we're gonna have to make sure that it starts below the header. Also at the bottom, we want to have our footer, which is currently not even displayed, and it will have a width of 100, font weight doesn't really matter, and it is positioned fixed to the bottom of and has 50, sweet Jesus, New Year English problems. Had a fixed height, so this is the height we also have to use here as margin bottom. The rest is just the logo, so it's not exploding our navigation bar. A lot of color here, styling the color of our buttons. So the regular button will just have Ion color light, and the active will use blue. The result of this looks now like this. Actually, the color for the toolbar is missing. Did I miss a little class in my tabs page? Let's see. I think, yeah, the ngIf should also have the class desktop. Or perhaps we could even use the desktop wrapper, whatever. Let's keep it like this. There we go. A nice horizontal navigation. We see the pages start now. This area was actually hidden before, so now we're able to see this. And of course, we could also use the grid in here and move the elements around, or perhaps collapse them. I don't know. There are a lot of ways to do this. But for now, this is now a lot closer to a web page than having a tab bar at the bottom, which is just expanded. So right now, this looks good. This also looks good. We got the footer at the bottom. I will also to show you one more thing, simply change our tab 1 page and just duplicate a bunch of items to see or to show how the scrolling on the page looks like. So as you can see right now, the tab name basically is sticking here, it's the header, but the rest of this can be scrolled, and we also got the margin at the bottom, so the footer is there. Of course, footer optional, perhaps use a different solution, but to tweak 2 little things more, we can use the mode iOS on our header, which will, I think, remove the little shadow we got here. So as this is anyway inside the container here, that's no problem. And the problem is that we can't just change all the pages. So now we can use our desktop wrapper class we applied to our router here and use this one at the top of our app in the global SCSS. And in this desktop wrapper, implement 2 more rules. One rule to align the text in the center of a toolbar, and also to remove this shadow that we got here, because I don't know if you want to have this on a web page, because normally there's just a title at the top. So the result is no more shadow and the title is in the center. And from this point on, I think I can leave you alone to build a great web application that uses a horizontal navigation bar on the browser and works great as a native application with a tab bar. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you want to see more about Ionic on desktop or got specific questions about this, there's a lot more we could talk about. We haven't talked about the grid, using different breakpoints, using height. So really a lot of things that we can do to make our Ionic app better as a website in a desktop view. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, leave the subscribe. This really helps me to grow this channel even more and to help more people with Ionic. Thanks for your support. I will see you inside the next video. So happy coding, Simon.